Okay, I'm sure we'll have a few people pop in the next few minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you especially to our panelists. I'm Teresa Mangum, and I am the PI on an Andrew W. Mellon grant called Humanities for the Public Good, and we've spent the past couple of years working on a graduate degree, which is actually morphing into perhaps several versions of graduate degrees, for students who are interested in thinking about ways to use the humanities in an applied way, in a range of careers. And so we're imagining what that would look like, what that degree would look like. And as part of that process, so many faculty and grad students and staff have worked with us that we're starting to see some of our philosophy of experiential, cross-disciplinary graduate studies move out into lots of different departments. One of the things that we've done with the grant, with gratitude to Mellon, is to offer mini grants for faculty members who would like to reimagine courses, especially intro to graduate courses, to do what all of our departments are thinking about now, and that is to think about how to open the conversation from the early part of a person's graduate studies to the possibility of thinking about a range of careers. And so I'm so grateful that a few of the people we've given grants to who've had a chance to give that a shot were willing to come and talk with us today about their experiences. I am going to very briefly introduce my colleagues here at Iowa who have been experimenting, and then let them introduce themselves as they're responding to questions. And we have a few questions we've come up with, but the conversation can go wherever. We welcome questions in the chat or observations. I know many of you are probably doing exciting experimental things too. And so we look forward to learning from you as well as sharing what we're doing. So let me go around the screen and just identify my colleagues, and then we'll start with the first question. And on my screen, Roxanna Curto is here, and she is an associate professor in French and Spanish and Italian. Is that right? Are you in French? Oops, I'm so sorry, Roxanna. But she teaches in both
French and Spanish. Associate professor of French and Spanish, yeah.
Thank you. Anny-Dominique is a professor in Spanish and Portuguese. Jennifer Buckley is an associate professor in the Department of English. And Anny-Dominique Curtius is also in the Department of French and Italian. And we also have Luke Borland with us today, who's the graduate assistant working with HPG. So for those of us who are sharing what you all have been up to, the first question I thought would be really interesting to hear about is, briefly, what was your own graduate Intro to Grad Studies course like back in the day? I can tell you mine was mainly a bibliography course. And Roxanna, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start with that. So I did a PhD in French at Yale, which is, the focus of that degree was really French literature from medieval times to the present. At the time, it was quite a traditional program. There was a course that was supposed to be a professional development course, and about half the students were native speakers of English and half were native speakers of French. And the assignment for the course was to write for 30 minutes every day on whatever you wanted. It could be what you're reading for class. It could be, like your journal, just anything in the language that you weren't a native speaker in. So the English native speaker is supposed to write in French, French native speakers in English. So there's a component of just sort of trying to get us to write. And then in the weekly discussions, we talked about the profession, the academy, with the assumption that everybody was going to become a professor. And at the end of the course, there was a cocktail party at the professor's house in which we were supposed to pretend that we were networking and that we didn't know each other. And we were introducing each other for the first time and like saying, I'm a specialist in this and that. And that was pretty fun, although it was also a little strange. So yeah, that was the course. It was taught by Ora Avni, who was a specialist in 20th century French literature. But it was a nice way to get a sense of community with the other grad students, I have to admit.
And Anny, what about you? What was your own intro to grad studies like?
As far as I remember, I did my PhD, first of all, at the University of Montreal in comparative literature. And when I saw the question, Teresa, I started to really think about what the course looked like. And it was not anything close to what Roxanna and I, we team taught last semester in terms of mentoring, networking, preparing for the camps, the job market, and so on and so forth. So I remember very clearly that we had to choose an advisor, I think, by the end of the first year. So basically what was happening is that students who had an advisor who was willing to work very closely with them in terms of all the aspects of graduate studies that I just mentioned, were in a way lucky to have very early this conversation and in a way be part of a constant daily, weekly reflection on what to do based on the different, aspects of graduate studies. So I had two advisors, and I think, among the lucky ones to have very early this kind of conversation. But I could quickly see the problem, which was a discrepancy between those who could have the conversation and those who were not necessarily ready to have very early an advisor, or who had an advisor who would not be always ready to provide this kind of training very early. So to me, it was a fantastic experience because the Department of Comparative Literature in Montreal was one of the best at that time in the early 2000s, late 90s. And it's the atmosphere with students coming from almost all over the world with different languages spoken, a very vibrant community, which was really helpful in order to kind of create this kind of relational mentoring between graduate students. But by the same token, I could realize that there was this lack of close training coming from the faculty in terms of being ready for the different moments, the different aspects of graduate studies. So this is what I remember, and good things, but also points that needed to be addressed and improved.
Thank you. Jen?
Well, I too have warm memories of my introduction to graduate study course. I was at Columbia University in an English and Comparative Literature program, and it was taught by the absurdly, almost like offensively gifted David Damrosch. And what I remember is a course that assumed that all of the students taking it wanted to be professional literary critics above all. And so, again, this is what I remember. The focus of the course was on teaching us what major 21st century literary critics do. We did some collaborative writing assignments in which small groups of us studied individual major critics of the recent past, some of whom are still working at the top of the profession. I remember my small group read several works by Edward Said, and we had to write a kind of a short, like critical companion type essay describing the work and introducing it to sort of hypothetical readers that we might have when we became professional literary critics. It was wonderful as a first generation college grad who didn't really understand what I was getting into when I went to graduate school. It illuminated one aspect of the profession for me in incredibly beneficial ways. But all of the information that I needed to actually succeed in the program, much less the information I needed to succeed to prepare for a career or careers. It was assumed that I would pick that up, and my classmates and I would pick that up on our own somewhere along the way, mostly by, I guess, osmosis. So while I had what I remember to be a wonderful experience, it was notably deficient in all of the elements that our UI English graduate students told us in a survey several years ago that they wanted from an Introduction to Graduate Study course. And we'll talk later about the course that I helped create in collaboration with colleagues and current and former graduate students to address their needs.
Thank you, Jen. And Anna, if you might help us turn that wheel by starting with what your experience had been, and then head into the question of what made you decide to redesign your class.
Well, my experience is that in the early 2000s, in the university, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I got my PhD, there was no Introduction to Graduate Studies course, and there wasn't either a professionalization course or anything in that, in that direction, nothing like that. So basically, you felt very lost. Unless you had a wonderful advisor who would train you in her office or something like that. Another thing that happened is that much of this information was learned through peers in social, informal situations. The problem with me is that I was one of the very few graduate students who were parents at the time. When I started my PhD, my older son, now he's 23, he was 3 months old. So of course I didn't have a social life with fellow graduate students. It was completely impossible. My schedule was completely different. So I missed a lot of that. And what I did when it was, I wanted to find a job, I wanted to learn what I was getting myself into was read a lot of books. That's how I learned how to do what I do actually, and how to try to be successful in my classes. Read books, read materials. The internet existed, but it wasn't as developed as it is now. So you just couldn't Google. It wasn't a thing at the time. So I just bought books. And that's why, that's one of the main motivations why I decided to create this course. It's more than a redesign, it's more a creation of the course. As far as I know, in my department, Spanish and Portuguese, once there was a course taught by a French professor and a Spanish professor on the profession, but nothing really like consistent of part of the core curriculum or anything like that. So this was as part of the renovations that we did to our PhD, we thought that it would be good to have this type of course. And it's not an Introduction to Graduate Studies course, actually. It's a professionalization and training, professional training and development is the name of the course. So the sooner students take it, the better for them, but they don't have to take it right in the first semester of the graduate studies. So that's one of the motivations. When we started thinking about that, it was the DGS at the time. So I was going to teach the course for the first time. And I was in the middle of my participation, I still am, the participation in the HPG initiative. So I was already listening to a lot of the different possibilities for careers and, the ideas that opened up my mind a lot. And I went, in particular, in connection with the HPG, I went to the MLA a conference in 2019, in January 2019, and I attended some wonderful workshops where I was introduced to things like Imagine PhD, several initiatives, some of them supported and sponsored by Mellon, where that was really a very, very pivotal moment for my rethinking of what a PhD should or could be. And so, yeah, and this semester is the second time I'm teaching the class, by the way. Last year in the spring, I taught it for the first time. I think this semester is going to be even less traditional. In the first semester, the first time in last year, I didn't want to focus only on traditional academic careers, but I feel that I didn't do as much as I wanted to promote and teach and make students excited about other careers, but with that feedback this semester, I changed a few things in the course, and that's going to be even more central to the course.
Jen, you're nodding your head. You want to jump in?
Very similar impulses, very similar kinds of feedback. The most vigorous nod was in response to your comments about using that feedback to make revisions to the next version of the course. But yeah, our approach in the English department was motivated by a lot of the same impulses that you describe, and a perception of a lot of the same needs among our students. I too felt that this course made steps toward incorporating information about and support for pursuing career paths outside academia, but the steps didn't go nearly far enough. There are other ways in which the course needs to be reshaped. I don't know how we could pack in more. We're going to have to learn how to cut back on some aspects of the course and expand others in response to student statements of their needs. But like you, I'm really grateful for the detailed feedback I got, and I'm really looking forward to teaching the next version of this course next academic year.
And I'm guessing that people who are here, and myself included, would really be grateful for concrete details. So, we've talked a lot with, and for all of you, HPG is Humanities for the Public Good, the Mellon grant. We just use the shorthand. But we've talked a lot in our meetings about, we use the phrase student-centered education, experiential humanities. But I mean, how did that translate very concretely into what you all tried to do in your classes, and what students seem to be asking for? Anybody want to jump in?
I suppose I could try to answer that question. So when Annie and I started working on redesigning the Introduction to Graduate Studies course, we came up with a list of topics, and we sent out a qualtrics to the students, most of which were students who were going to enroll in the class, but also some students who maybe weren't in coursework, and asked them to sort of say which topics interested them the most, if there were other topics that they'd like for us to address. And so from the very beginning, we were trying to listen to the students and give them the space in which they could tell us what they wanted to learn about. And I think in this course, much more so than in the other graduate seminars, there was a lot of listening to the students. And I would say that there are a lot more surprises than maybe would occur in the literature courses. I don't know if Annie agrees, but there were times when we would put something on the screen to discuss, or we would come up with a topic, and we were very surprised by what the students said. One example would be the day that Annie came in with the new PhD that Teresa, you're developing, and the kind of outline of that, and the students started asking some really interesting questions that Annie and I hadn't even thought of, that led to a fascinating discussion. So,
can you flesh that out, Annie? What were some of the things that the students were interested in?
Yeah, certainly, I can flesh that out. I remember that at some. So I concur with what Roxanna just said. The questions were really interesting and made me think throughout the class session about the ways in which we could actually develop answers to this question into the next course. For example, they were thinking about the place of languages in the HPG PhD. They were wondering to what extent there would be enough room for the learning of languages for example, students, returning students who didn't have, for example, any real knowledge of a language, and how would that factor into the number of credit hours and the ways in which the languages could help them be more successful on the job market. So in a way, for me, that was a clear indication that languages, well, we all know that languages matter. So it's not really, a place for me to advocate for that. We know that, but it's the ways in which we could really craft this into the PhD for the public good. So so that was a question that made me think a lot, and I also noticed how they were interested in the ways in which their PhD could really be something, I would say, concrete in terms of how they can use the degree to not necessarily be an academic, even though most of them, I think, want to do that. But all of a sudden, it was some sort of a new dimension, a new opportunity that they were considering that they probably had not thought about deeply. So that made me think that we are really proposing something interesting here. So it's just a matter of thinking through it carefully and offering the students the opportunities that they see, in this HPG PhD.
Yeah, I if I can add something, Teresa, sometimes it's tricky, this listening to students. I mean, of course, I agree with Roxanna 100%. I mean, you have to listen, because mentorship is not telling them what to do and expect them to do that. Mentoring is listening and then helping them to get where they want to get. But it's tricky because what I found last spring when I taught this course, I always start, I mean, that semester and this semester too, we start the first day talking about our dreams, our fears, what they would like to see each other, where they would like to see each other in 5 years, and what do you think they can do in order to, some kind of self-reflection, right? And everybody in the class, everybody wanted to be an academic. Like the first day, it was like, I want to be a professor, a tenure track position, etc. Right? So it's tricky because if I just listen to them, I would just do that. But I feel that the way that things are today in the world for PhDs, I am not doing them any favor just doing that. I feel I have a responsibility to present things that maybe they haven't even considered because they have never heard about them. It's just, the path seems to be so determined, so fixed that sometimes thinking outside the box feels almost like, I don't know, dangerous for a student. So I feel like I want to listen. This is what you need. This is what you want, but this is also what you may need in the future. So I'm going to try and teach you how to be a little more, flexible about your options. But it is also tricky because, of course, all of us here, I think, the panelists, we have been trained, as we could hear, we have been trained to do what we're doing. So it's also taking us outside our comfort zone, is talking about things that we don't necessarily feel so comfortable with, like a resume, not having the type of academic life we have, how to be successful in the job market when you never had to go through that different job market. So it's a process. It's a process for the students. It's a process for us. But I think that we need to do it because otherwise we're not preparing them for the world that is awaiting them once they are done. So
yeah, if I can actually piggyback on what Anna said, and I agree with you, Anna. And I'm kind of going to go back to the first question: what was the intro to grad study look like when we were graduate students? I do remember vividly that there was no discussion whatsoever, open discussion whatsoever about the reality. No question, no reflection about the process. It was just like, okay, you're doing a PhD, you're going to be an academic, and oh, don't worry, there's going to be a lot of jobs. There are jobs out there, no problem. So it was like, in a way, I'm not going to say that they were lying to us, but they were not presenting to us the reality of what a job market could be. I mean, at that time, it was okay. There were jobs, but I think that what we need to do is to be really open with the students. And that's what we did, Roxanna and I, by structuring 2 modules in the course. One was the state of the humanities and the academy and the pandemic, which are obviously 2 considerations to really think about in terms of a career. So I think that what we really need to focus on in terms of restructuring an intro to grad study is the idea of process and the idea of being honest and open to graduate students, because they know that things are happening, they know what the reality is, so why would we hide it to us? It's a disservice to us, but it's also a disservice to a community of future scholars.
Thank you. And thank you also for Yairo Marshall's comment about bringing in outside speakers. And I know that Paula Ahmad in Cinematic Arts wasn't able to join us today. She also had one of the course grants, but I know Paula arranged several panels of alums who are working in multiple sectors and in the filmmaking industry, among other things, and really had great conversations with the students in her class. They were so surprised to hear about people who had gotten degrees and gone on to work in the film industry. And I wonder, did you all bring alums into your classes? Is that something you have done or want to do in the future?
So I can pitch in here. I brought in to the Icon site, which I filled with materials about, and I'm happy to screen share that at any point if someone wants to see sort of a more granular account of what I'm describing as it manifested in an Icon site. But I brought in job search materials produced by graduates from the English program who had pursued a range of different careers, both different kinds of colleges and universities, non-faculty positions within colleges and universities, nonprofit positions, industry positions, government positions, just a wide variety of materials that they produced on the path towards successfully achieving that career. So seeing what they did to get those jobs, students reported that was very important. We were able to bring in, and here I'm responding to the point that was just made on the chat. I was able to bring in a member of our Grad Success Center staff who is himself not just an expert career coach, but also is himself pursuing Master's in Library and Information Sciences with the intent of a really broad job market search post-PhD that would span academic positions, academic library positions, and staff positions. And he was fortunately agreed to talk very frankly with the students about why he was doing that and how he was doing that, how he fit that into the PhD, even as he was working as a career counselor in the Grad Success Center. The panel idea, bringing in graduates of the program who are already working in those positions to engage in conversation with students. That I didn't do this past semester, because as I've said, that course was packed. Students wanted direct instruction in academic and non-academic writing genres. And they wanted me to teach writing badly. They wanted me to teach writing. And I just couldn't find a way to get all of that into a single 16-week course. But the panel approach, in addition to bringing in the materials that got our PhDs their jobs across a wide range of professions, that's something I want to amplify in the next version of the course.
And I think I remember, Jen, that the English department was having some of those kinds of panels generally that were open to everyone, which would be a great balance with the course.
Yeah, we're so grateful to be able to do the AAU initiative sponsored speaker series directed by my colleague Stephen Boyce at this point, bringing in grads who are working in positions outside universities or in non-faculty positions within universities. And that's been very successful and something we hope to continue. But I know there's a need also to, bring those types of conversations, even in some limited way within the course itself. Because what we found is that, the attendees for the speaker series, very often sort of early stage PhD students weren't attending those talks. So we have to find a way to work those conversations into the structured course in order to be able to get, just thinking about alternative careers in students' minds right away. Most of my students were first and second years. And, by the time students are, imminently approaching the job market, it's my opinion that that's too late to start thinking about multiple career paths. So the course could use that revision aimed at first and second year grad students for sure.
Were there other things you all did, concrete kinds of activities that the students seem to appreciate or that they ask for in the next go round, in addition to things like visits from alums?
There is something I didn't do last year, but I'm going to this year. I really wanted to bring former students from my program, but it was impossible to find someone available who was not an academic. So what I did, I brought a couple of assistant professors, and they talked about academic jobs, etc. But then I realized that I don't have to limit myself to graduates from my program. I mean, like students from English and students from history, they have very similar skills. They get very similar skills and experiences that they can really be helpful for our PhD students. So that's one of the things I'm going to do this year. I'm going to bring students because limiting myself to Spanish is too limiting, and then it's not so easy. Another thing I'm going to do, I found this group at Berkeley, Beyond Academia, where it's a group organized by graduate students at Berkeley, and they organize a lot of activities that they have this type of goal of get more familiar with careers outside the academy. And last year, for example, they had a wonderful conference. They are supposed to have another one this year, and they bring many people from the community with PhDs, sometimes from the university, but in non-academic positions. That's another opportunity I would like to explore, even if it's not someone I invite, but if we can participate in the conference. And these conferences are free for all graduate students from all institutions. So that's something else. Once you start looking, there are things going on. You have to start looking, and there are many different opportunities to talk to different, people, faculty, alums, all kinds of people. So that's another thing I'm going to do this semester.
And I'll just mention that our Associate Dean for Graduate Education is here, Christine Getz. Thanks for being here, Christine. And Christine had started last year a really interesting program that's based on a model from Ireland. And Christine, you might just want to say a word about that program, which I think is a great companion piece to these intro classes.
Thanks a lot, Teresa. And I have to give credit to some of my other colleagues who worked really heavily on this project, Teresa included, Maureen Neiman, Vincent Rogers, Sarah Mason, Christine Navon Warren. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. And of course, we reached out, I'm Shelley Campo. And of course, we reached out to the professional development team of Jen Tidal and Brady Crean as well to help us put this together. But we met as a group over the summer multiple times, and we were designing a program after something that was described in Inside Higher Ed that was done at the University College Cork in Ireland. And actually some of this, I was not able to attend this particular event because of another meeting, but some of our group got together also with people from that institution to talk about it. But it's especially, we designed it as a career boot camp for later stage doctoral students and postdocs who came together for a couple of days to talk about careers in academia that were not the traditional professoriate type of careers, but rather other kinds of academic careers or careers you might describe as, this word is imperfect, but academically aligned, in the persons who were doing academic sorts of tasks in industry, in nonprofits and other kinds of organizations like that. And what we did was we worked together as a group all summer in a bunch of meetings to create a 2-day program where we could introduce the students to ways of networking beyond their own student group within their department, to meet people who were doing things in different kinds of career tracks, who were we engaged with alumni and brought a bunch of alumni in who did 2 panel sessions. We had one group on Zoom and one group in person, because at that point we were sort of before Delta, as I recall, Teresa, right as that was sort of coming forward. So we were starting to meet in person again. We had some social events. We had some different exercises that helped people to think about how the skills they had acquired during their PhD and postdoctoral training were transferable and translatable. And I thought it was I had a great time, and we're going to be doing it again. We're just about to, I'm meeting with Maureen, I think tomorrow, to start thinking about putting together our team for next year. And I know already that Teresa is willing to work with us again, but we are trying to work across the disciplines as well. That was another point of focus that we brought to this, was rather than having it just around the humanities, we actually worked across all the disciplines in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So it was really exciting.
Thank you, Christine. It was great. And it gets back to an issue that I think you raised, Anna, which is that we as faculty also need to be educated. We need to really learn how to articulate what the skills are that we're developing, and to learn from our friends in other working places, in business, in government, where those skills are needed and what language they even use to talk about research and kinds of writing we're familiar with. So it was a great experience to make those broader connections too. One of the things that I'm really curious about also in the work that you all did, it sounds like a lot of you had good conversations with students during the class and as follow-up about, after they had been exposed to some new ways of thinking about their fields, some new possible opportunities for using Spanish lit, the training they'll do in a Spanish lit department, in French and an English department, in history. What changes did you see in students' attitude, their thinking about what next in their graduate career over the course of the semester? And I wonder, especially, were they starting to think at all about other things, like extracurricular things they could be doing in addition to the class, to start feeling more prepared for any contingency?
But many times, the first time they hear about careers outside the academy is during these courses. They haven't even considered the possibility. And of course, you cannot consider what you don't know. So I think that's the great breakthrough, is just talking about that with them, and coming from an advisor, a professor in the department, which removes a lot of the stigma, because believe me, there is still stigma. For many people, getting a tenure track job as a research from universities is still, the goal. And from there, you can go down and down and down, and down there is the alternate careers, right? So in order to change that, the message has to come from leaders. And for our students, the leaders are us. So we need to tell them, this is okay, this is possible, you're more than welcome to explore this. So I'm going to give you some information so you can start exploring your interests. And so to me, that's the most important thing. Something that happened last year is that some students started looking at things that maybe they wouldn't have explored if they hadn't considered these new ideas, like getting some training in digital projects, things like that, or starting to think and how to do all these things I'm doing here, like teaching. Tell me really, you always talk about transferring skills. Yeah, tell me, which skills? I mean, what do I do when I'm teaching that could be very helpful, very useful, very appreciated in different fields. That type of conversation, it was surprising. They came to my office or Zoom or whatever, and they asked, so really, what am I learning here that can be helpful somewhere else? So it's a small change, but to me, it's huge. I mean, even if it seems small, they're considering exploring other things, which is awesome.
Christine, did you want to? Oh, I'm sorry. Chris,
I was just going to reflect on what Anna and some others have been saying, Annie and Roxanna, I think it was Roxanna also, about that experience of the students coming in and really looking towards a tenure track position and not really having thought about anything else. And you're making me think about the fact that maybe a late stage career boot camp is not the only thing we need. Maybe we need a different kind of early stage career boot camp where we give students a day or two to explore what they might want to think about getting training in doing as they're going through their doctoral program. So that's a really important point. And thanks for bringing it up, Anna.
Thank you. Somebody else was about to jump in too.
Yeah, I was about to jump in. I was, over the break, I was thinking about the ways in which, what we did in the Intro to Grad study course, Roxanna and I, could be enhanced in different ways. And I was thinking about different possibilities, not necessarily related to our students in French and francophone studies, but also students, broadly in the humanities on campus. And I was thinking about collaboration among graduate students and mentoring among themselves. And because when we were doing small group discussion in the class, I could see the benefit of that kind of activity. And I was thinking of the ways in which we could develop that more broadly. So I have several ideas for now that I would really want. I'd be happy to share them with you. But the idea would be to kind of create some sort of a lab or a workshop, I don't know how to call it, but to invite someone who would be in a way at the junction of academia and administration and come and talk to students and develop with them this idea of other career possibilities. So basically it would be some sort of a two dimension, having the conversation with someone and also building regularly, like every month, this conversation among students with among themselves about mentoring, about collaboration, and also about the ways in which they can think about those new careers. So it's really a way to not leave the course, where it was in December, but carry it over into different dimensions. Because I can see them working together, they teach together, they share the same offices. So why don't we build on those relationships that they already have and carry it over into something concrete in terms of labs, workshops, and guests coming to talk to them?
That's a great idea, Annie.
Just follow up on Annie's point for 1 second.
Sure.
Because this was a new iteration of the course, I had it open to any students who had not yet passed the comprehensive exam, and it was originally we had an unusually small incoming class, and so partly it was a way to fill the class, and partly it was a way to meet the needs of students who were more advanced in the program, but still wanted to take this new version of the course, having also taken a previous version. Annie, your point about student collaboration. In my class, student collaboration was also cross-cohort. And that was very important to the success of the course. Having fourth-year students, helping to, first-year students demystify the various stages of the program to talk about their own experiences. Their certificate program work, their internships, things that they had done that first year students had they didn't even know existed. So having that cross cohort collaboration and conversation among students was so important to the success of this version of the course, that maybe the sort of lab or workshop like model that you describe could, extend that aspect of the success we found much further.
And someone mentions in chat a position that's actually a lot like Brady Creams, the person that Jim was talking about earlier, that a graduate student is that actually has an administrative position rather, I assume, than the TA-ship, as a career consultant position, and is working in the Graduate Resources Center. And this is how our graduate college ended up with this much broader, richer sector within the grad school that helps with career planning. We have a wonderful, I think both people that I know are in that office, the wonderful Jen Heidel, who now is an assistant dean running that program, and then our own English grad student, Brady. And I mean, they teach me so much all the time about, they've been involved in Imagine PhD and its development and all of these other movements across the national landscape. And I think that's a brilliant idea. I agree. I think having those kind of administrative graduate assistantships are really wonderful. Another thing y'all are reminding me that we did early on, pre-COVID, it's kind of shocking to remember that you could do this back then, but we planned a networking event where we brought together, I think, 20 graduate students and about 15 to 20 people from across campus who were in career positions at our foundation, in the dean's office, the provost office, in the libraries, and also a few business people from the community who have good tight relationships with the university. And I met with the grad students for an hour and did a crash course in how to network, which, as I told them, is basically how to have conversations with new people. So it's all the skills they learn as classroom teachers that it doesn't occur to people always to use in a social environment. So we rehearsed how to walk up to each other and start a conversation, how to offer people enough detail about you to start. And it's not just about the content of your dissertation, but about lots of things that you're doing. And then our guest came an hour later, and on the clock, I made everybody shift every 15 minutes and talk to somebody new. And it had so many unexpected benefits because it made the students feel so much more valued in their work, to see that these non-specialists found their work interesting. And then the business people and administrative people, they were really excited to feel like they were supporting graduate students. So I think, any ways we can start working more actively with our staff colleagues, with our business colleagues and communities is such a benefit for all of us. One of the other things I wanted to ask y'all about that's a little bit veering on the side, but maybe not, is people like Katina Rogers talk a lot about the hidden curriculum of graduate school. And it sounds like you all have talked about that in different ways a lot in this conversation. The fact that people show up, and we've been doing this long enough, we've forgotten what you didn't know at the beginning of graduate school. And so I'm wondering how there's both the hidden curriculum and also the hidden job market. And I'm wondering how in your intro classes, some of what you were doing helped to surface the hidden curriculum and the hidden job market, and how students responded to that.
Well, in my course, we actually read large sections of Des Calarco's book, which is called The Hidden Curriculum. And the students responded pretty well to that, focusing on teaching and the hidden curriculum, or rather the non-existent curriculum that many graduate students bring into their pedagogy. We read David Gublar's book called The Missing Course, which is geared at graduate students and first-time teachers, aiming to help sort of demystify best practices pedagogy, student-centered pedagogy, in a way that departmental training courses often just don't have the time to do for graduate students going into the classroom for the first time. The response toward the hidden curriculum / demystification of various aspects of the program and professional world was extremely strong. Students loved that part of the course. They wanted more of it. And also, just for me, teaching the course from the perspective of a first-gen college grad who had actually worked extensively in other kinds of positions. Also just talking to me, and I assume this would be true of any faculty member who would be willing to share those experiences in a frank and honest way about their own career paths. That also served the function of demystification for them. And in the feedback I got, that was the single most important aspect of the course for them, apart from the direct instruction in various writing genres, including like dossier and job market documents, was the focus we had on demystifying graduate programs, the professions, and professional career paths, more broadly speaking.
Interesting.
So I would say that something that Annie and I did, which ended up being really enjoyable, was that we had 2 weeks in which we talked about French and Francophone studies as the field. And this was a notable change from some of the previous iterations of the course, in which, we'd had guest speakers who presented maybe like the different parts or subfields of French and Francophone studies. So when we were coming up with how to teach the course, we made this intentional decision that we weren't going to, present it as Renaissance, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, Francophone in the way that it maybe had been in the past, but we were going to have 2 conversations in which we actually talked about the history of the discipline, especially with regard to our own particular field of expertise, which is Francophone studies, and how that field had sort of evolved, throughout our lifetimes. And it turned out that we had very different experiences because Annie, coming from the sort of, doing her PhD in Canada and her connections to France and Martinique, had a different experience than me, who had most of my education in the US. And that was very interesting for the students to see that. And so that ended up being a great way to talk about that kind of hidden curriculum, is to talk about the discipline and how it had changed and evolved, and some of the assumptions that had been involved with that. And then I think that throughout these conversations, this gave the students a sense that they could talk openly and honestly with us about a lot of these questions, because we were always sort of questioning the assumptions. Annie, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
No, I think that you said everything. yeah, good.
So that's always, in my opinion, the best part of the course. What you just mentioned, those conversations where we demystify many of the things, when we try to question the assumptions, where the students are hungry for those conversations. They really want to know how this works. So yeah, and actually you mentioned Katina Rogers. This is the book I'm using now for many readings for this course in this semester. That helps a lot. Having some reading to discuss helps a lot in order to bring up these hidden curriculum ideas, these topics that are not usually part of the official conversation about graduate school, about the job market, about the world. So I would encourage to find a couple of good readings that you can use almost as a point of departure to have deeper conversations about all these issues.
Oh, I know we're getting to the end of our time. I so appreciate this conversation. I always learn a lot from my wonderful colleagues. I'll just mention that on the Obermann YouTube channel, we have a series of conversations we recorded as part of our HPG work. And one of them that I wish we had time to talk about today was about graduate admissions. And we learned from a really experimental program out on the West Coast that, if we're really serious about diverse careers, maybe it's not even intro to grad studies where we start. We might want to start all the way back with, at the point of admissions, what we advertise that we're offering and how we invite people to apply who might not have imagined themselves in doing graduate work, but would find what we do really valuable. We're also going to have at least two more of these conversations in the rest of the spring. The first will be organized with Syracuse University and with Katina Rogers, and that will focus on creative dissertations and alternatives to dissertations. You know, you've heard about the hip hop albums and our own at Iowa podcast dissertation. So we'll be hearing from people who've done those projects, their advisors who worked with them, and what advice they have for us. And then toward the end of the semester, we'll have a session on public humanities, master's degrees and certificate programs, and how they might integrate with PhDs in the humanities and social sciences. So we welcome you to come back. If you look at the Humanities for the Public Good website, all the events are posted there. You can sign up for the newsletter. And in the meantime, it's great to see so many of you here today. And thank you so much to Roxanna and Anna and Jen and Annie, and to Christine and Luke for driving the car. And I hope you have a good rest of the week, and we'll see you at the next event. Bye, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.